everybody, welcome to the Mana Leak. I'm John as always, and it's time for the final set review for Battle for Zendikar. We're going to be covering the colorless non-devoid cards, and we're also going to be covering the lands. This has felt like a gigantic set, but we are finally at the end. As always, there are disclaimers back in the white set review video. If you haven't listened to those, you should, as well as just catching up on the rest of the set. But without further ado, we're going to jump right on into the first card. Bane of Bala Ged, however you say that. It's 7 colorless mana for a creature Eldrazi at uncommon. It's a 7/5, and it says whenever Bane of Bala Ged attacks, defending player exiles 2 permanents he or she controls. Anybody who has played Rise of the Eldrazi know that this basically says Annihilator 2. That's what Annihilator was. It was a mechanic that a ton of Eldrazi had. It was fun as a mechanic as long as you were on the good side of it, but it hurt as a mechanic if you were on the bad side of it. So Annihilator's back on just one single creature. Ulamog's Crusher was one of the only reliably playable Eldrazi in Rise of the Eldrazi. The rest were all kind of difficult to cast generally in Limited. You didn't typically want to be loading up on the 9-drops or even the 10-drops or any of them. They weren't super duper playable, but Ulamog's Crusher was. It was an 8/8 for 8 with Annihilator 2, and it had to attack every turn. Now this is a bit weaker. It's a 7/5, but it's a bit cheaper. It's at 7, and it doesn't have to attack every turn, so if you do need it on the defense, it is there. But then when you attack, you're A, coming in with a 7/5, and B, they're immediately exiling 2 permanents, be that creatures or lands or whatever. They're going to fall behind really fast. This feels like the prime target for Eldrazi ramp. Yeah, it'll be nice to sometimes get out Ulamog himself or get out one of the rares or fancy mythics, but you're not always going to have them. They're not going to be in every draft. Bane of Bala Ged is going to be in most drafts. It is an uncommon. There will probably be one-ish at a minimum in most drafts. So I think this is what you really want to be looking out for. If you are even starting to take the parts of Eldrazi ramp, I think you want to really grab this one pretty high. It's going to be powerful. It's going to be what closes the game in most cases. You don't want multiples. Maybe 2, but only if your ramp is not just Scions. Because if you're using your Scions to get just to the first one, they're not going to be around to get you to the second one. But when this hits the table, boy, bad stuff's going to happen. I don't quite think it's first pickable. I think you more want to make sure you're in the ramp deck before you take this, but I could see the argument for taking this and hoping to get into the ramp deck. It also, at 7, does fit as a curve topper in any control deck, and most mid-range decks will even be okay playing this. The only thing that's not going to want this is heavy aggro. I've got to go with a B+ on this, maybe even an A-, but I don't quite think it's exactly first pickable. It is darn close though, so B+ for me. Next up we have Blight Herder. Blight Herder is a 5 colorless mana creature Eldrazi processor at rare. It's a 4/5, and it says when you cast Blight Herder, you may put 2 cards your opponents own from exile into their owner's graveyards. If you do, put 3 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion creature tokens onto the battlefield. They have sacrificed this creature. Add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool. So it is a 4/5 4/5. That was fun to say, actually. It's a 4/5 4/5. It's not always going to do what you want it to do, though. This really relies on just how reliable ingest process is. If you can reliably have 2 cards in your opponent's graveyard, then yeah, this is pretty darn good. It's a 4/5 for 5, which is okay, and you get 3 1/1s that are going to ramp. That's very nice. Technically, this is a 7/8 for 5. If you can do that, I'm going to really have to play with this format to find out if ingest process is something that's actually going to be reliable enough. The fact that it is worded kind of like the other card where you can take 2 different opponents' cards, which obviously is only going to apply in Commander or in Two-Headed Giant or more casual formats like that, does make me concerned that the ingest process mechanic isn't actually super duper amazing. So ultimately, I'm going to be very hesitant about Blight Herder. I'm going to probably not first pick it, probably never first pick it. Even if Ingest Process was good, I don't think I would first pick it. If Ingest Process was good, if I was solidly in that deck pack 2, pack 3, I would probably take a look at taking it, especially if I had some stuff to do with those Eldrazi Scions. But as it stands, I'm going to be a little bit low on this guy to begin with. I'm going to go with a C+. That's partially based on my hesitancy on Ingest Process, and that's partially based on me just thinking this card's just okay. It's not great, it's not splashy, it's not amazing, it's just okay. But I'll be keeping an eye out on Ingest Process for sure. Next up, we have Breaker of Armies. This is an 8 colorless mana creature Eldrazi at uncommon. It is a 10/8, and all creatures able to block Breaker of Armies do so. This seems pretty good. I like this more than the Devastator that we'll get to in a little bit, which is another 8 mana drop, one of the only other 8 mana drops. The obvious effect here is that you're going to wipe out 10 toughness worth of creatures on your opponent's board. It's a really slow sweeper, kind of, because you play it, and then your opponent goes, oh, okay, so you're going to attack and wipe my board or most of my board. That is how I think this is really going to play out, and unfortunately, 8 mana for a sweeper isn't great. And the fact that they can't choose to chump block means that this guy will probably die in any sort of board stall situation, but it will at the same time super get you out of that board stall situation. It will destroy a huge amount of your opponent's team. Now, the other thing this does is virtually give your team unblockable. Everybody but this guy, because you attack with him and the rest of your team, and they can't block the rest of your team. They all must block Breaker of Armies, which is actually pretty darn good. People often somewhat foolishly undervalue that effect. Roar of the Challenge, I think, was undervalued the entire format of Khans of Tarkir. I used that card to great effect, and a number of people did use it to great effect. Any sort of mass lure is really good. I'm hesitant to, in any way, downgrade this guy for being 8 mana, for being so late game, for being a really slow sweeper, because I think it is one of the better ways to break a board stall. That being said, I don't think it's first pick at all, and I think it does only go in the Eldrazi ramp decks, or decks that may not be ramp, but have some Scions kicking around. I don't think this goes in aggro, and I don't think this goes in too much mid-range decks, again, without having some Scions to back it up. As well, I think it may live in the sideboard for some mid-range decks. If they find themselves in a matchup where they're tending to go to a board stall, then this can come in as a Breaker of Armies. But otherwise, I think this goes a little bit more towards control and more towards the Eldrazi ramp, wherein I think it is just fantastic. I've got to go with a B+ on this one as well. I don't think it's first pickable. It doesn't feel like a bomb to me, because I do look at it as a sweeper spell and or a lure spell to give the rest of my team unblockable. So I will give it a B+, nothing higher, but nothing lower for sure. Next up, we have Conduit of Ruin. This is a 6 mana creature Eldrazi at rare. It's a 5/5. When you cast Conduit of Ruin, you may search your library for a colorless creature card with converted mana cost 7 or greater. Reveal it, then shuffle your library and put that card on top of it. The first creature spell you cast each turn costs 2 colorless mana less to cast. The first ability is interesting. Top of the library is pretty slow, and be very careful doing that if there is ingest on the other side of the board. It would suck to put your Ulamog on top of your library, and then you have your opponent, hit you with an unblockable ingest or a flying ingest, and there goes Ulamog off into exile. So be careful with that. I really like the second ability. It's a really interesting form of ramp. Making your first creature cheaper is really kind of cool. And it's not even colorless creature. It's any creature, which I feel is a little bit of a flavor fail there. It should be colorless creature. But yeah, your first creature spell is 2 less to cast. That's going to help you ramp even more. That's going to make that 7 drop cost 5 when you do draw it. That's going to make your Breaker of Armies cost 6. That's going to make your Bane of Bala Ged cost 5. I like this card a fair bit. I think I would first pick this card and go into Eldrazi Ramp, go into big creatures, because, hey, I've got a way to make those big creatures cheaper, along with all of the Eldrazi Scions and Green Ramp and other things that I'll get. So I think this card's very first pickable. I think it's got a key role to play in the big Eldrazi decks. I'm pretty happy to take it, and I've got to give it an A-. I really like Conduit of Ruin. Next up, we have Deathless Behemoth. This is a 6 colorless mana creature Eldrazi at uncommon. It's a 6/6. It has Vigilance, and you can sacrifice 2 Eldrazi Scions to return Deathless Behemoth from the graveyard to your hand. Activate this ability only anytime you could cast a sorcery. 6/6 Vigilance for 6 is cool. For 4 is even better if we have Conduit of Ruin out. But 6/6 Vigilance for 6 is cool. That's fine. It's a big, beefy attacker, and it's a big, beefy blocker at the same time. The second ability, though, sounds really difficult to me. You need to have 2 Scions that you haven't used up, that you won't use up, that you still have around. You still need to recast this because it does come back to your hand and not to your battlefield, so that means that those Scions aren't going to be around to help you recast this. It has to be done at sorcery speed. There's consistency issues going on here with Deathless Behemoth. There's some very serious consistency issues going on. And I don't think I want to really jump into paying those consistency issues, playing around with those consistency issues. I think there's just so much better that you can be doing at 6 in the big Eldrazi deck, in any deck really, to really give this guy too much of a second glance. It's an okay beefy curve topper if that's what you need, if you've found yourself without a win condition or without something to tussle with the bigger things on your opponent's board, then maybe you might want to take this. But ultimately, I just don't super see the value in this. It feels almost like a little bit of a non-bow to sacrifice 2 Eldrazi Scions to bring this back to your hand and then be behind on mana, behind with 2/2/2s, etc. I've got to go with a C+. I'm not super sold on Deathless Behemoth just yet. Next up, we have Desolation Twin. This is a 10 mana creature Eldrazi rare at 10/10. When you cast Desolation Twin, put a 10/10 colorless Eldrazi creature token onto the battlefield. It is a 20/20 for 10. I can't ignore that. It is 20/20 for 10 mana. That is some extreme power for sure. Now, the Twin, of course, is super weak against blue with bounce. Interestingly enough, the Desolation Twin is super strong against blue with bounce, because nobody's going to want to bounce the Twin, the Desolation Twin, and just have you recast it and get another 20/20 out. Obviously, this isn't Ulamog. It's not indestructible. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't have trample. It doesn't fly. It doesn't have anything other than being big. And as I talk about, being big is not enough. Famous example is Ghoultree. Ghoultree was a 10/10 for 10, and it was cheaper as you had creatures in your graveyard, so every creature made it 1 cheaper. It was garbage. It was bad because it didn't have trample, because it didn't have any cool abilities, because it didn't have anything going on with it. Now, this I won't say is bad, because it's asking your opponent to really have a lot in hand right away in order to deal with it. Now, it does cost 10, and that is not something to take lightly. You need to be in big Eldrazi ramp in order to play this. You do not play this in mid-range. You do not play this in aggro. You maybe play this in control. 10 lands is a lot to ask for. You're going to need Scions to back it up. So make sure you have those. Make sure you're the deck that can live long enough to get the lands and the Scions out to cast this. Everybody's very excited about these Eldrazi. Everybody's very excited about casting 10 mana spells. But I've played Rise of the Eldrazi. It was a trap if you weren't careful. So be careful. But this is a 20/20 for 10. I can't ignore that. I've got to go with a B+ on this. I'm not going to not play with a 20/20 for 10. I think it's going to be fun. I think you just need to be careful and build around it properly. So B+ for me. Next up, we have Eldrazi Devastator. This is an 8 colorless mana creature Eldrazi Common, it's an 8/9. It has trample and a whole bunch of flavor text. Just an 8/9 trample for 8. So this is just shy of being a big dumb creature. It does have trample, of course, which means that if your opponent is chump blocking it, it's going to be getting through for damage, and it's going to be getting you a bit of inevitability. So I'm not going to say it's bad, but again, like a lot of these big Eldrazi's, like everything at 7 and above, arguably a little bit more 8 and above, you need to be careful. This doesn't go in every deck. You need to have the Scions to back it up. You need to have the green ramp to back it up, be that Natural Connection or Life Spring Druids or something. You need to back this up in order to play it. Now, of course, it is very weak to Death Touch things. It's very weak to any sort of creature destruction. The only thing it's not weak to is, I guess, burn. But be careful with this guy. I think this falls into kind of the cheap Eldrazi kind of pool, not Ulamog's Crusher level, if we're talking about Rise of Eldrazi, more like the big creatures that were big. And they were big because they cost a lot, and they cost a lot because they were big. So I think this is really hit or miss. I think you can take this if you need to. If you're taking these because you're the Eldrazi ramp deck and you're not seeing anything else, I think somebody else probably has a better Eldrazi ramp deck than you. But it is kind of a second tier creature for that deck. So I'll go with a C+ on it, but I'm not super sold on Eldrazi Devastator. Next up, we have Endless One. Endless One is an X mana. That's it. X mana creature Eldrazi at rare for a 0/0. It says Endless One enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. So, of course, if you pay 1 mana, this is a 1/1. If you pay 2, it's a 2/2. If you pay 5, it's a 5/5, etc. There are some cool interactions with this, of course. If you have Conduit of Ruin, this card costs 2 less. What happens is you announce X, and then you pay X. So I would announce 10, and then I would pay 8, because it costs me 2 less, and I would get a 10/10. It also combos with Herald of Kozilek, the one that makes colorless spells 1 cheaper. So there's definitely some cool combo, fun shenanigan things that you can maybe try to pull off with this. But of course, we're looking at a couple of rares and an uncommon and some other things that aren't really going to come together in any way reliably. You're looking at this as a creature that just simply passes the vanilla test. Now, perfectly passing the vanilla test is fine, as we've talked about, up until about 6/6 or 7/7, at which point, if there's no trample or flying or abilities or anything, the returns really kind of fall off. You don't get as big a return on your investment as a 10/10 for 10 as you do for a 5/5 for 5 or a 6/6 for 6. So I'm pretty happy to play this as a 5-drop or a 6-drop. If I happen to be in a stall or in a late game and I've got the mana, yeah, sure. I'll make this a 9/9, a 10/10, whatever I happen to have kicking around. I'm hesitant to sack a bunch of Scions to this, because the Scion mana is going to be valuable if I am in the Eldrazi ramp deck. And I almost don't think the Endless One fits into the Eldrazi ramp deck. I think this fits more into any other deck, really. I think any deck would be happy to have this. Even aggro would be happy to have this as a 3-drop. You don't draw your 3-drop, well, here's your 3-drop. You don't draw your 4-drop, well, here's your 4-drop. So I think any deck is happy to have this. I think Eldrazi Ramp might actually want to pass on this one slightly. It looks really fun, but it is totally 100% vanilla, so I'm not going to give it a huge grade. I'm going to go with a B- on it. It's a card that I think I would pick up whenever I'm looking for, a good but not great creature, because that's ultimately what it's going to be whenever you cast it, but it does have significant flexibility to it. Next up, we have Gruesome Slaughter. This is a 6 colorless mana sorcery at rare. It says, until end of turn, colorless creatures you control gain, tap. This creature deals damage equal to its power to target creature. So all of your colorless creatures get a one-sided fight ability for the turn. That's really cool, but it does require a whole lot of setup. Starting with the draft portion. You have to take this highly enough that you want to be in the colorless deck, or you have to be in the colorless deck and get past this. That's the first amount of setup. Then you have to have a bunch of colorless creatures down. Then you have to be in a position where this ability will allow you to do some big things. if you're doing this and taking out, 1 or 2 of their 5 creatures, it's probably not worth it. If you're sweeping their board, it's probably really worth it. If you're taking out some very high value targets, it's probably worth it. So I'm hesitant about this because it does take so much setup. So many things have to go right for this spell to really go off. Worst case scenario, of course, this spell does literally nothing because you're behind and have no creatures. Or it still does literally nothing when you only have 1 or 2 or even 3 creatures and they're all kind of weak. So I don't know about this card. I'm probably just gonna pass on it for a good long while until I get proven wrong. Feels kind of like Arc Bond, obviously not too similar in effect, but it feels like that level of card where, yeah, those words in that combination have powerful scenarios, but they just often don't happen. They just don't often shape up. So I'm going to be kind of out on this. I'll give it a C+. I fully see the power, and I fully see those scenarios where it's going to be awesome. I just worry about how consistently it is going to be set up. I think I'd rather just have another really good colorless creature instead of this rare. So C+ for me. Next up, we have Kozilek's Channeler. This is a 5 colorless mana creature Eldrazi at common for a 4/4. And it has tap, add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool. So it's a 4/4 for 5, which is okay. It's fine. And it ramps you pretty darn good. It sort of pays for itself as long as it lives for a couple of turns or so, enough to generate 5 mana back for you. This is a really good stopgap in the Eldrazi deck. I can definitely see, dropping this into something even bigger, maybe the Conduit of Ruin, and then into Ulamog. It's going to be an awesome play if it happens. Obviously, it would be much more flavorful if it went into Kozilek, but Kozilek's not in the set. But I think this is going to be a pretty solid card for the big Eldrazi ramp. I don't know if any other decks are going to want it. Meteorite was okay. It was a 5 mana rock that did some damage and generated 1 mana. This is a 4/4 that generates 2 for 5. I would say that's just solidly better than Meteorite, but I still don't think every deck's going to want it. Because, of course, what is, your average mid-range deck that wants to get, 6 or 7 mana on the board going to do with this? Yeah, it's going to help them out for a turn or 2, but they would have gotten there anyways. So I don't think it's for every deck. I think it's very much for the big Eldrazi ramp deck, but I think it is fine nonetheless, and I think it is going to be pretty powerful in the decks that want it. So I am going to go with kind of a split grade here. I would say B-, C. B- in the big Eldrazi deck, C in any other deck, really. Next up, we have Oblivion Sower. Oblivion Sower is a 6 colorless mana creature Eldrazi at Mythic. It is a 5/8. And when you cast Oblivion Sower, target opponent exiles the top 4 cards of his or her library. Then you may put any number of land cards that player owns from exile onto the battlefield under your control. It doesn't just have to be from those 4. Any that have been ingested or exiled in any way, shape, or form can be put onto the battlefield. So it's a 6 mana 5/8, which already is fine. The 5 is ever so slightly low, but the 8 is a fair bit big. This thing is going to live on the board for a good long while. And you get to mill 4, which on the surface is not all that exciting, but you could use that for your processors if they're still kicking around. 6 mana is a little bit late into the game in most cases, so I wouldn't expect to get a ton of processor use out of this, but it is there. And you get to ramp. You get to potentially get, I would say on average, 1 or 2 lands off of your opponent. Maybe you even just go crazy, get all 4 lands and get Ulamog out on the next turn. But it seems fine. It seems good. I would probably first pick it and head towards Eldrazi ramp, though as a 6-drop, I think it is playable in many, many, many decks. And I think that's going to be the magic number. I think 6-drop Eldrazi are going to be playable in most decks outside of aggro. I think 7 drops and higher are going to be relegated to big Eldrazi ramp, regular ramp, and decks that happen to have a number of Eldrazi Scions kicking around. But I'm going to go with B+ on this. I like the ability quite a bit. I like the ramp off of it. I like the processor interaction, and I like the stats. I like 5/8. It's pretty decent. Next up, we have Ruin Processor. Ruin Processor is a 7 colorless mana creature Eldrazi processor at common. It's a 7/8, and it says when you cast Ruin Processor, you may put in a card an opponent owns from exile into that player's graveyard. If you do, drumroll, gain 5 life. Yay. It's not great. It's a 7/8 for 7. Cool, I guess. At that point, we're hitting into that diminishing returns of the vanilla test. There's no trample. There's nothing cool going on with this. So big whoop. It's a 7/8 for 7. There's better stuff I can do for that much mana. But it's a processor, and processors get to process cards and do cool effects. Gaining 5 life just isn't that exciting. It's a fair bit. You know, it's a quarter of your starting life total. It could change a game. But it is going to happen one single time, and you have to have a card exiled when you play this, or else you are just playing a dumb 7/8 for 7. So ultimately, I don't think I want this card. I think if this is one of the cards that you're ramping to, then you're not in the top tier Eldrazi ramp deck. You're not in the tier 2 Eldrazi ramp deck. You're in the bad Eldrazi ramp deck. I would probably pass this in almost all cases. I would take it relatively late if I was Eldrazi ramp for the sideboard, in case I got enough ingesters, and in case I ended up in a matchup where I needed to gain 5 life, where that was something that would help me out. But ultimately, I've got to drop this to a C minus, maybe even a D plus. I don't like Ruin Processor. I just don't think it's good. Next up, we have Scour from Existence. Scour from Existence is a 7 colorless mana instant at common. What do you get to do for 7 mana at instant? Well, you get to exile target permanent. Exile target permanent. Creature, land, artifact, enchantment, whatever you want that's on the board, it goes away. 7 colorless mana, that's a whole heck of a lot. That is not going in your aggro deck. That is not going in most mid-range decks. That maybe could go in a control deck. I still wouldn't advise it, though. Your 7-drop in a control deck needs to be a game ender. Needs to be your win condition, not a single kill spell. I think this really only fits in big Eldrazi ramp, and even then I don't think it fits, because you don't want to ramp into this. You don't want to waste Scions on this. You want to waste Scions on Ulamog. You want to waste Scions on your big Eldrazi creatures, the things that are going to win you the game, not the things that are going to kill one creature. I'm out on this card, which is strange for a card that just simply says exile target permanent. That's awesome, but 7 colorless mana is just way, way, way too much for me. I'll go for a C minus on this, I think. You need to be the deck for this. Do not put this in most decks. Be very careful with it. C minus from me. Next up, we have Titan's Presence. This is a 3 colorless mana instant at uncommon. As an additional cost to cast Titan's Presence, reveal a colorless creature card from your hand. Exile target creature if its power is less than or equal to the revealed card's power. This is interesting. It's very interesting. I think a lot of people are prone to best case scenario mentality. They're thinking of revealing their 7/5 and exiling whatever they want for 3 colorless mana at instant speed. They're thinking of revealing their 10/10. They're thinking of revealing something awesome. I'm reminded of the Reveal a Dragon cycle from Dragons of Tarkir. Now there were significantly less dragons than there were colorless creatures in the 2 sets. So I don't think it's going to be remotely as bad as that, which, you know, basically never triggered in Limited. This will be playable. You know, you will have colorless creatures to reveal. However, I think they're much more likely to be 3 power, 4 power, maybe. So you're going to be hitting your opponent's middling to okay creatures. You're not going to be hitting their bombs most of the time with this. I don't like this because there's so much luck on it. You know me, I don't like consistency. I don't like luck. And this is pure luck. This is, did I draw this card and did I draw something else good and haven't yet played it? Because keep in mind, if you draw your 5/5 or 6/6 or whatever colorless creature and you don't have a great target, are you not going to play that big creature just to keep Titan's Presence turned on? And then you can very well, walk into situations where you play that big creature and it gets killed, or it gets blanked, or it gets, matched for another big creature. And now your Titan's Presence is offline. It's a dead card. This is another card that is a non-zero amount of the time a dead card. And that makes me nervous. That makes me really nervous. If you are in, I imagine, black, red, colorless, this probably goes up a bit where the vast majority of your creatures are colorless, and I can see it being pretty good there. And it is 3 colorless mana at instant speed, which is pretty darn solid. So I'm not going to dismiss it, but I'm going to avoid it a fair bit until I see that it is consistent. But I don't know if that's going to happen. I'm going to go with a C+ on it for now because yes, I see the power, yes, I see the possibility, but boy, do I see the inconsistency. Next up, we have a face of the set, Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger. 10 colorless mana for a legendary creature Eldrazi at Mythic. It's a 10/10. When you cast Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger, exile 2 target permanents. It has Indestructible, and it has whenever Ulamog attacks, defending player exiles the top 20 cards of his or her library, which in most scenarios is going to be the remainder of their deck. Unless you're somehow casting Ulamog on turn 3 or 4, which I don't think you're going to be doing, you're going to be exiling basically their entire deck. That is crazy. That is insane. That wins the game. Yeah, you're actually going to win by mill most of the time with Ulamog. I'll be the fun police here. Ulamog doesn't fit in every deck. Ulamog fits in approximately 2 decks. Big Eldrazi ramp and regular green ramp. Don't play Ulamog if you are anything else. If you get it pack 2, if you get it pack 3, I know you're going to first pick it. You're going to first pick it for value. You're going to first pick it for fun. If you're trying to win, don't play it. Don't play it. If you see this pack 1, pick 1, take it. Go big green ramp. Go big green Eldrazi ramp. Do your thing. Cast Ulamog. Have fun. Enjoy it. But be careful if you're any other deck. I'm going to rate Ulamog an A+. It's just awesome. It's super, super, super awesome. But you need to be careful. Please be careful. Please don't get greedy. If it's your local F&M and the prizes aren't great and you're just having fun, yeah, sure, throw it in your ally deck and see if you can pull it off. And if you do, it'll be an awesome story. But any sort of competitive level, be careful. Be very careful. Make sure that you have the right deck for Ulamog. And if you do, well, good game if you draw it. Good game. Next up, we have Ulamog's Despoiler. This is a 6 colorless mana creature Eldrazi Processor at uncommon. It's a 5/5. And as Ulamog's Despoiler enters the battlefield, you may put 2 cards your opponents own from exile into their owner's graveyard. If you do, Ulamog's Despoiler enters the battlefield with 4 +1/+1 counters on it. So it's a 5/5 for 6, which is pretty mediocre. A vanilla 5/5 for 6 at that. Or if there are 2 cards in exile, it's a 9/9 for 6, which is not mediocre. Very beefy. The trample issues and whatnot, but when you're getting that much of a discount, it's fine. It's fine. But this is the whole ingest process thing. How regularly is there going to be 2 cards in exile? I don't know. And again, I feel like this is multiplayer, commander, 2-headed giant due to the templating of potentially taking cards from multiple players' exile. I don't really want to give this a go. I don't want to give this a go until I know that ingest process is a reliable mechanic. So I'm pretty darn out on Ulamog's Despoiler to begin with. I just don't think it's going to trigger enough of the times. When it does, cool. When it doesn't, ew. And when it doesn't, you're going to be tempted to hold this back, and then you're just going to be wasting time. And, not a fan of Ulamog's Despoiler. I've got to go, I think I'll go with a C on it. It's okay. It's a 5/5 for 6. If you are somehow desperate for creatures, there you go. And it gets better if you're in the ingest process deck and if that mechanic is reliable. But I'm going to go with C on it. That's my real life rating. My personal rating is more like a D on this. Finally, for colorless non-devoid cards, we have Void Winnower. This is a 9 colorless mana creature Eldrazi at Mythic. It's an 11/9. Your opponents can't cast spells with even converted mana costs. 0 is even. Your opponents can't block with creatures with even converted mana costs. Yes, we've all heard it. Even Wizards has heard it. Your opponent can't even. So what do I think of this card? It's an 11/9 for 9. Those are some pretty beefy stats, and it totally randomly hoses a portion of your opponent's deck and battlefield. I don't like that. This is a Hearthstone card. This is a card that Hearthstone would create. This is the LOL OMG so random card. It's an 11/9 for 9, which is okay. No trample, no evasion, blah, blah, blah. You know that story. And random cards, none of which I'm going to know are or aren't, get hosed by this. That is the mother of all inconsistency. Mother of all inconsistency. I don't really think I want to play this in Limited. I don't think I want to play it. Outside of the fun factor, I'm talking competitively, I'm talking attempting to win. Honestly, if I get this release night, I'll play it. If I get this 2 months into the format, I'll play it. I'll give it a go. But I just don't think it's all that good. I don't think it's a great ramp target. It is a big, dumb ramp target with a giant D6 attached to it. A giant random things are gonna random attached to it. And that's just not what I like to play. I don't even really want to assign a grade to this because I know everybody's going to play it. I know everybody who opens it is going to go big Eldrazi ramp and play it and see how it goes. I think realistically I've got to give this no more than a B-, and that's just because of the stats. It's an 11/9 for 9, which is a little bit undercosted. Of course, you have to be in the right deck. Realistically, I feel like it's more like a C, C-, maybe even just a D. And when I'm sitting down and I open this in the heat of the moment, it's an A+. I'm going to take it and play it. Who am I kidding? Unless, of course, it is a competitive event. But yeah, Void Winnower, your opponents can't even. Ha, 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 ha. All right, we're going to move on to lands now. A lot of the lands are in cycles, although unfortunately the cycles are very different. So some of the lands I'm going to cover all at once, and some of them I'm going to cover one by one. But first thing first, we have Ally Encampment. This is a land at rare. You can tap it to add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool. You can tap it to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Spend this mana only to cast an ally spell. Or you can pay 1, tap it, and sacrifice it to return target ally you control to its owner's hand. That is not from the graveyard. That is from the battlefield to your hand. So you bounce one of your own creatures. This ultimately feels way too narrow for me. Obviously, this goes only in the ally deck. You have to have the ally deck. You're not first picking this. I think you're super late picking this in the first pack, and you're picking it still super late, even if you're the ally deck in pack 2 and pack 3. I feel like this is much more meant for constructed. Even the wording of cast an ally spell, because there are, I think, ally instants and sorceries. Maybe I'm just making that up. Maybe there will be in the future, who knows? But I just don't see this being worth it in Limited. You lose some of your color, and being in the ally deck, you're certainly not the colorless deck. You're not going to have a bunch of Eldrazi running around. You're going to need your colors to hit. So I just ultimately don't really see a place for this, and I don't see it being a high pick in any way, shape, or form. I've got to go with I think a D+ on it. I don't think you want this card in any deck other than the ally deck, and even the ally deck, I might just want another basic land, to be honest, because it's going to hurt you for any of your non-ally creatures, for any of your instants, your sorceries, etc. I've got to go with a D+ on it. Next up, we have the first of a cycle, Blighted Cataract. Each of these blighted lands is different, unfortunately, so I can't just do them all at once. It's a land at uncommon. You can tap it to add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool. You can pay 5 and a blue to tap it and sack it to draw 2 cards. So card advantage is cool. If you're late game, which blue often wants to be, then I guess this is probably fine. It's similar to the Foundry of the Consoles from Magic Origins, where you could play it and it would give you colorless mana, and then later in the game you could sack it and get a couple Thopters. Here you get a couple cards. Good enough, good enough. Getting a couple cards, cool. You do have to sack a land, so remember this does cost you 7 mana, not 6 mana to do this, because you do sack this land away. Ultimately, I'm not super sold on Blighted Cataract. I think it goes in a very specific deck, and that deck needs to be kind of late-game blue-black control. I think that deck's going to be decently happy to have it, and I think all other blue decks aren't going to want to touch this with a 10-foot pole. I've got to go with like a C+ on it. I see the upside, and I see the value, and it will be decent in some decks, but ultimately just probably skippable for a lot of decks. The next blighted land is Blighted Fen. It is a land at uncommon. You can tap it to add 1 colorless to your mana pool. You can pay 4 and a black to tap it, sacrifice Blighted Fen. Target opponent sacrifices a creature. So you get an edict off of this. That seems not too bad for me, and the cost is a little bit more bearable at 4 and a black as opposed to 5 and a blue. Now, edicts are not the best late game because, of course, your opponent's much more likely to have 2, 3, 4 creatures, and one of them is potentially just some, piddly little 2/2 from earlier in the game, and they're going to say, okay, cool, I sacrifice it. Big whoop. And you sack a land for it and spend probably a turn. Now, that's not every case. Of course, there will be a number of cases where you do get their bomb. Their bomb's the only thing down. Or you do get a decent creature. Or you do, even the ties in some way, shape, or form. You still have to sack a land, so you're still going to be behind a slight turn on that, and that's not the best. But I do like sacrifice effects a little bit more than I should. I'm going to go with a B- on this. I think it's a little bit more pickable than the Blighted Cataract, and a bit more playable in almost all black decks outside of aggro. So a B- for Blighted Fen. Next up, we have Blighted Gorge. Blighted Gorge is a land at uncommon. You can tap it to add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool. Then you can pay 4 and a red and tap it and sacrifice it to have Blighted Gorge deal 2 damage to target creature or player. You get to shock for 6 mana. 6 mana. 4 and a red plus tapping this one, so virtually a mana, so 6 mana. That's an expensive shock. Now, it's a late game shock. You have this land doing other things for you, namely tapping for a colorless mana in the early game, and then when it becomes viable, when it becomes useful, when you can finish off a creature, etc., you have that option. But again, you have to hurt your mana base to do this, and I don't want to hurt my mana base. I don't want to hurt my mana base at all. I'm not a big fan of Blighted Gorge. I think it is really slow and underpowered for what you're paying for. I've got to go with a C- on it. I don't think I want to play this too terribly often at all. So C- for me. Next up, we have Blighted Step. Blighted Step is a land at uncommon. You can tap it to add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool, and you can pay 3 and a white, tap it, sacrifice Blighted Step. You gain 2 life for each creature you control. Big whoop. Big whoop. There's very few situations where I'm going to be wanting to sacrifice a land and spend part of a turn, if not all of a turn, worth of mana to get 2 life per creature I control. Maybe I would side this in a really bad aggro matchup where I'm taking a bunch of damage and I need to get back into it. But if I'm in that matchup, I probably don't have a lot of creatures, because if I did, I would be okay. So even there, I don't super see where this comes in. This feels like one of the worst blighted lands to me. I'm super never going to take this card. I've got to go with a D- on it. Maybe it does have sideboard connotations, but I don't really see them, because the general sideboard option for a card like this would be one where I have a low creature count. So D-. Finally, for the Blighted lands, we have Blighted Woodland. This is a land at uncommon. Tap, add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool. Pay 3 and a green, tap, sacrifice Blighted Woodland. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards and put them onto the battlefield tapped. Then shuffle your library. So, hello ramp, sort of, plus smoothing a little bit. For 4 and a green, and at instant speed, which is kind of cool. as well, because you're going to get 2 lands onto the battlefield at instant speed. Double landfall triggers on your opponent's turn is definitely going to be something interesting for sure. And you get to ramp a single land. Of course, you're getting 2, but you are sacking 1, so it is a net of 1 ramp. I like Blighted Woodland. I like it a fair bit, and I think it goes in the green ramp deck. I think it has the most clear deck that it wants to be in. The blue one arguably clearly wants to go into blue control, but this one clearly wants to be in green ramp, or in green Eldrazi ramp, or in 5-color green-based good stuff in order to get, 2 other color of lands instead of forest with the Blighted Woodland. So I really like it. I think it has a lot of places to go into, and I think I would even play it in most green decks unless it was like an aggressive ally green-white deck or something. So I'm pretty happy to see Blighted Woodland, and I'll take it relatively highly if I think I'm in green or if I'm solidly in green. So I'm going to go with a B on it. I actually rather like it. Next up, we have the first of a cycle that I can do all at once. We have Canopy Vista, Cinderglade, Prairie Stream, Smoldering Marsh, and Sunken Hollow. These are the new dual lands. There's giant debate about what to call them. I like them being called Tango lands. It takes 2 to tango. It takes 2 lands for these to enter untapped. What do these say? Well, they all have the land types, just like the shock lands, just like the original duels. Canopy Vista, for example, is a land, forest, plains. So any card that says go and search for a forest, you can go and get this forest plains. Any card that says plains, you can go with its forest plains. They are at rare. They all tap for the 2 colors of mana that they would produce if they were those 2 basic lands. And they enter the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands. Now, that's very important. Basic lands, so your Blighted Woodlands aren't going to help these on tap. They have to be basics. And these aren't basics themselves. Make sure that when you're playing a land tutor spell in this format, that you read if it says basic land or if it says land. Sylvan Scrying can go and get this. Natural Connection cannot go and get this. So make sure you do read those words carefully. These are not basics. But yeah, these lands are going to be some amount of value, so I imagine you would take them first pick anyways. But realistically, these are totally super, not remotely first picks. Think about the pain lands. Dual lands just generally aren't first pickable in draft because you don't know that you're in those colors. You have no reason to think you're going to be in those colors. Pack one, pick one. Getting a really good green-white gold card is a reason to be in green-white. Getting a green-white dual land isn't a reason at all to be in green-white. So yeah, if you're not playing for value, if you're playing rare redraft, which I never recommend doing, if you're playing at a competitive level, you're going to pass these every single time. Every single time. You're never going to take these pack one, pick one, ever. You're going to take these only if you're in those colors, or maybe if you're thinking about going into those 2, you're already in one, and you're flirting with the other one, you might take it. Maybe it helps solidify you in one over the other. So I mean, ultimately, they're Ds. They're cards that only go in very specific decks and that you should pass most of the time. Value-wise, you're probably going to take them first pick, though, at least until their value stabilizes a little bit. After those lands, we have Evolving Wilds. This is a land at common that we've seen a whole lot of lately. It's been in, I think, the last 3 sets, this one included. So this one, Magic Origins, and I think it was in Duels or Dragons. Maybe it was in Fate. No, I think it was in Dragons. It says, tap, sacrifice Evolving Wilds, search your library for a basic land card, so not one of the Tango lands, and put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. This is a card that you need if you are 5-color Converge. This is a card that you need if you're ramping. This is a card that is okay to have in a 2-color deck, but not remotely needed. If you need it, take it. If you don't, pass it. There's no reason to take these very highly if you don't have a reason already. They're not innately valuable. They're not awesome just on their own. You have to be in a deck that requires some sort of mana smoothing, some sort of, ensuring you get your colors sort of effect. And this is what it's there for. So if you want it, you want it. And if you don't, you don't. So I guess technically that's a D, but in the deck that wants it, it's a C, a C+. Next up, we have Fertile Thicket. This is a land at common. It says Fertile Thicket enters the battlefield tapped. When Fertile Thicket enters the battlefield, you may look at the top 5 cards of your library. If you do, reveal up to 1 basic land card from among them, then put that card on top of your library, and the rest on the bottom in any order. Also, you can tap to add 1 green mana to your mana pool. I'm not a super big fan of this. It's a tapped land, so it's going to hurt in ramp, and it doesn't ramp me in any way, shape, or form. It just smooths out my mana a little bit by being able to draw it next turn. On turn 1, this would be okay, and I would hate myself playing this basically any other turn other than turn 1. I'm really out on Fertile Thicket. I don't like it. I don't think you should really take it terribly often at all, or ever really include it. I've got to go with like maybe a D+, because maybe it can go in the Converge deck to help you smooth it out. That's about the only place I could ever convince myself to play this. Otherwise, D- I'm going to go with. Next up, we have Looming Spires. This is a land that is at common. It enters the battlefield tapped. When Looming Spires enters the battlefield, target creature gets +1/+1 and gains first strike until end of turn. Tap it to add a single red mana to your mana pool. Well, this is a bit better, I guess. +1/+1 and first strike is totally fine. It's something that I think aggressive decks are going to want, but aggressive decks are in no way, shape, or form ever going to want a tap land. So it fits in that deck and doesn't fit in that deck. I think it actually works slightly better in kind of a red, maybe black mid-range deck where that first strike helps you break through in the mid-game, where, there's some threats on the other side of the board that you can't really attack into profitably, and now, hey, you can attack in and probably take something out or get in for some extra damage. I don't know that boost is good enough for me to want to play a tap land. Tap lands are a pretty big tempo hit. Pretty darn big tempo hit. The green one, which I'd be okay with playing on for the first turn. This one I would hate playing it on the first turn, which is one of the only places I'm okay with playing a tap land. So, I'm not sold on this being great. I think it's okay. If you are a red deck in that kind of mid-range territory, I think it's okay. I'm going to go with a C+ on it, but that's being slightly generous, I think. Next up, we have Lumbering Falls. This is a land at rare. Lumbering Falls enters the battlefield tapped. Tap, add green or blue to your mana pool. And you can also pay 2 colorless plus a green plus a blue, and Lumbering Falls becomes a 3/3 green and blue elemental creature with hexproof until end of turn. It's still a land. So this is one of our first man lands of the set. In fact, our first man land of the set. And for 4 mana, we get a 3/3 hexproof until the end of the turn. That's not too bad. That's pretty normally costed for a creature. Now, of course, we have to do that every turn if we want to keep attacking with it. But the nice thing is that it dodges removal even more than just having hexproof. It's not there when it comes over to the opponent's turn, so they can't even edict you or anything like that if this were your only creature and it was a sorcery edict. That being said, it is still a tap land, and I'm not sold on tap lands. I'm really not sold on tap lands. It's a tap dual land, so you can take it if you want to splash and if you want to maybe get into 5-color convergence or something. But I don't think it's a first pick in any way, shape, or form. None of the lands are first picks. Lands are generally never first pickable. But the ability is nice. The ability is good to pump some extra mana into it, and generally with green-blue, you tend to have extra mana. It's it's the Simic colors. It's the doing stuff with mana, dicking around with mana kind of color combination. So I think it's a totally fine card. If you are green and blue, yeah, sure, why not? I'll pick it up, I suppose. If you're not green or blue yet, but you're one of them, I don't think I would pick it up. These dual lands ultimately end up being pack 2 and pack 3 cards. It sucks to see them in pack 1 because, somebody ends up just value picking them. They don't actually end up being terribly useful. Maybe it helps inform your choices later on, but you should let actual cards inform your choices rather than lands. No, it's still a good card. It's still fine. I'm going to go with a B on it. I think getting a 3/3 hexproof is totally fine. Just not super duper exciting. Next up, we have Mortuary Mire. This is a land at common. Mortuary Mire enters the battlefield tapped. When Mortuary Mire enters the battlefield, you may put target creature card from your graveyard on top of your library. Tap to add a single black mana to your mana pool. I'm, as we've said, not a big fan of putting things from your graveyard on top of your library, taking away a draw step. You know, remember Reclaim? You never really played Reclaim, or you shouldn't have really played Reclaim in Magic Origins. This only hits creatures, so it's not even a full Reclaim. It's on a swamp that enters tapped. This card seems bad to me. This card just seems so slow because it's a tap land, so slow because it's a graveyard to top of library effect. It's just not something I ever really want to play. I see no reason to ever play this. I don't want this card in any black deck. I've got to go with an F on it. I don't like it. You know, I don't like Dutiful Return. I don't like this card, and this is a significantly worse Dutiful Return. So F for me. Next up, we have Sanctum of Ugin. Sanctum of Ugin is a land at rare. You can tap it to add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool. Whenever you cast a colorless spell with converted mana cost 7 or greater, you may sacrifice Sanctum of Ugin. If you do, search your library for a colorless creature card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. Wow, is this a straight up F? This is just bad. So bad. So it's a colorless mana, so you're not really wanting this to be in your, multicolored deck. But there are colorless decks that might kick around here, so it's okay, I guess. Now, whenever you cast a colorless spell, that costs 7 or greater, you can blow this up and go and find a colorless creature card and put it into your hand. Yay. First off, if your 7 or greater spell isn't just the best card you have in ending the game, then I don't know what's going on with your deck or what happened in your draft. Maybe you just got super lucky. But it comes into your hand, and you're killing a land for that. So you're already making that colorless creature that you're going to go get harder to cast. This thing works against itself. It's going to trigger so rarely. When it triggers, it should already be kind of the end game. I don't like this card at all. I think it's just flat out garbage. It maybe has some constructed connotations, maybe? But even then, I don't think so. But yeah, not touching this card. Not with a 10-foot pole. Solid F. Next up, we have Sandstone Bridge. This is a land at common. Sandstone Bridge enters the battlefield tapped. When Sandstone Bridge enters the battlefield, target creature gets +1/+1 and gains Vigilance until end of turn. Tap, add a single white mana to your mana pool. So I didn't love Looming Spires, and that was +1/+1 in first strike. +1/+1 and Vigilance is a lot less good. And again, these lands have no place in an aggressive deck, so +1/+1 when they enter the battlefield is kind of weird. So I gave Looming Spires a C+. I think this is a C, maybe even a C-. I just don't care about this effect. I care far more about playing a basic Plains than I do about ever playing a Sandstone Bridge. Next up, we have Shambling Vent. This is a land at rare. Shambling Vent enters the battlefield tapped. Tap, add white or black to your mana pool. Pay 1 white/black. Shambling Vent becomes a 2/3 white and black elemental creature with lifelink until end of turn. So same thing I've been saying about dual lands. They're not that great. You're not necessarily going to first pick them, or rarely ever going to first pick them. But if you're in those colors, cool. It's a good pickup. And if you're in one of those colors, maybe it helps you go into another color. This one I do like more than Lumbering Falls. Lumbering Falls was a 3/3 hexproof for 4. This is a 2/3 lifelink for 3. I like lifelink a lot more than I like hexproof on my temporary land creatures. That's going to get me a fair bit of value. It's going to potentially block if I'm doing this on my opponent's turn, of course. It's going to get in for some damage or stop a creature from attacking. It's going to gain me life if it does damage. It does a lot more, I think, than Lumbering Falls does, just off the cuff. So I'm pretty happy with Shambling Vent here. I think it's a B+. Let's say a B. I don't want to go too high on a land. So I'll go with a B. I think it's a good pickup. I think if you're in black-white, you're just going to be super happy to have one of these. And I think it might lead me down that route a little bit if I've taken, a lot of white and a little bit of black, or a lot of black and a little bit of white. But yeah, B, I'm pretty happy with it. Next up, we have Shrine of the Forsaken Gods. This is a land at rare. Tap, add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool, or tap, add 2 colorless mana to your pool. Spend this mana only to cast colorless spells. Activate this ability only if you control 7 or more lands. I don't really care for Shrine of the Forsaken Gods. It's a colorless land. Those are already not the best. And I can only get 2 mana out of it. A, for colorless spells. B, if I already have 7 or more lands. So 6 other lands and this one. That means I have 7 mana available. That extra 2 is going to bounce me from a lot of the really good Eldrazi that I like into a lot of the Eldrazi that I'm not super certain about, and not quite to Ulamog and Desolation Twin. And I just don't know about that. I feel like it's so greedy expecting that you're going to go off with this. That you're actually going to get this triggered and online, and that it's going to make a lick of difference. I don't see it happening. It's such slow, quote-unquote ramp. This is going to be yet another rare that I'm going to be kind of sad to open. Obviously, Commander playable and Commander focused, I think. Kind of like Shrine of the False Gods, I want to say, is the Commander card that is basically the same as this, except significantly better. But I'm out on this card. I think it's just not great at all. I got to go with like a D on it. I don't want to play it. Maybe you do, but I don't. Next up, we have Skyline Cascade. This is a land at common. Skyline Cascade enters the battlefield tapped. When Skyline Cascade enters the battlefield, target creature an opponent controls doesn't on-tap during its controller's next on-tap step. Tap, add a blue mana to your mana pool. This one I kind of like. This one is slow. It's a tap land, but it's designed to be in a tempo deck. It's designed to be in a deck that's buying time, or you're attacking with creatures when you can't tempo them, when you can tap something down or bounce something or something like that. So I think this one actually does fit a little bit better than some of the other ones do. Enough that I'm going to give it a C+. I would probably be willing to play this in a lot of my blue decks. My blue decks do tend to be very control-y or tempo-y. I don't tend to jump into the blue aggro all that much, but I'd be happy to play this in most blue decks. So I think C+. Again, you're not spending a high pick on these common lands ever, I hope. They're going to be a low pick when there's nothing else really for you in the pack, beside this or an F. So a C+ for me. Finally, we have Spawning Bed. Spawning Bed is our last of the bajillion lands. It is a land. It is at uncommon. You can tap it to add 1 colorless to your mana pool. And you can pay 6, tap it, and sack it to put 3 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion creature tokens onto the battlefield. You know what they have on them. Spawning Bed. It's kind of like Foundry of the Consoles. The creatures that you get are arguably better than Foundry of the Consoles. Now, you're not ramping by 3 here because you are sacrificing Spawning Bed, so you're actually only ramping by 2. With 2 of those being temporary. So you're going to go presumably from 7 mana available, if you have no other Scions, to having 9 mana available, which, is an okay boost. It's an okay boost for sure. It's kind of like Shrine of the Forsaken Gods, though, where if I'm already at that much mana, is the extra boost really going to be that good? Now, I do get 3 1/1s, so that's cool. Maybe that's what I need to bust through with some extra damage, but these aren't Thopters. This is not Foundry of the Consoles. They don't have flying. They're probably going to be facing some things on the other side of the board, so I'm not super sold on Spawning Bed either. Maybe if there is a pretty good ramp deck and you can get to 6 really fast, then this gets a little bit more value, but I think that's going to be too hard to do, and I think I'd rather actually draft better cards than this and just play that way rather than play this. I think it's fine. I think it's kind of a C, maybe even a C+, but no, I'm going to go with C. I see its value. I just feel it's a little bit weak, so C for me. But that's going to wrap it up for this video and for Battle for Zendikar as a whole. This set review has felt like a huge set review. It's a normal large set review, and I've done 2 of those so far. This is my 3rd one. Not sure why it felt so large. It's a complex set for sure. The mechanics and the archetypes that exist, I think, are going to be very complex. I'm glad a lot of people joined Magic with Magic Origins, because I think people who are going to jump into this draft format are going to be a little bit lost and a little bit overwhelmed. Good luck to those of you who are going to be brand new to draft. I'm really excited to draft this format. There's all kinds of archetypes I want to try out. I want to try out Ingest and Process. I'll try out the Life Gain deck, even though I don't believe in it. I want to see colorless decks. I want to cast big Eldrazi. I want to cast teeny tiny little allies. I want to do so much with this set. I'm excited to draft it. I'm excited to play Sealed. I'm excited to screw around with it in Wacky Wednesday and pick random rares and bad stuff like that. The pre-release is this weekend. I encourage everybody to go out to pre-release. If you haven't been out to one, you should. They are fantastic. They are always catered towards new players. If you've never played Magic, you can show up at a pre-release and still get by. People are very friendly. Store owners are always happy to have new players out there, growing the player base. I say that as a player. I say that as a sort of tournament organizer, and I say that as a level 1 judge. I love seeing the community build around these pre-releases. Luckily, this pre-release doesn't have any seeded packs or color choices or anything like that. You just show up and you get the same box as everybody else. Inside that box is going to be 6 booster packs of Battle for Zendikar, plus a single foil rare, or potentially mythic, which is going to be promo date stamped just like they have been. But unlike usual, where it's a set of, 1 of 8 per color, it can be any rare in the entire set. You can get a promo Gideon, you can get a promo Ulamog, you can get a promo garbage Eldrazi rare that I can't remember the name of. Any rare, and it's playable in your deck there. Plus, you get a cool little deck box and a spin down die. It's a great time. It's a great event. If you happen to be in London, Ontario, you should definitely come check out the Gamers Emporium, preferably today or tomorrow, because our pre-release is filling up and it's going to be a big one. We're aiming for 60 people. Should be tons of fun, and I will have pre-release recap video, ideally that Saturday, if not Sunday, of my pre-release video of the event, plus coverage of my deck and my thoughts on construction and how my matches went, and etc. So make sure that you stay tuned for that. As well, this is not the end of the Battle for Zendikar pre-release release cycle of videos. You can definitely expect a live behind-the-shoulder draft video next Friday on release night of my first draft of Battle for Zendikar. You can expect a box opening video or 2, plus we'll be starting crack-a-packs of Battle for Zendikar this coming Tuesday. So as always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you can find me on Twitter at The Mana Leak. That's L-E-E-K, like the vegetable, not the card. And you can also find me on Facebook at facebook.com/The Mana Leak. You've already found me here on YouTube. Make use of that comment section down below. You guys have made great use of that. I've loved interacting with you, seeing you guys interact with each other. Make use of that comment section. As well, if you like the videos, you should click that little thumbs up icon. That lets me know that you like the videos. That lets the world know that you like the videos and keeps my videos rising up through the ranks. Finally, if you haven't subscribed, you should. If you're one of the new subscribers, I have over 210 as of this recording new subscribers from the past week. Welcome to all of you. But if you haven't subscribed, there's a button below each video. There's one in the outro of each video, and that'll keep you up to date on all the latest Crack-a-Pack Tuesdays, Wacky Wednesdays, Spiky Saturdays, all of the various Battle for Zendikar pre-release and release video cycles that will be out, and potentially even a new series, maybe starting next week. So if you want to be the first to see those videos, make sure you subscribe. But as always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you all next time.